Hello, I'm Elena van Stee, blog editor for Context Magazine, and today I'm very excited to welcome our special guest, Musa al-Gharbi, to celebrate the publication of his new book. It's called We Have Never Been Woke, The Cultural Contradictions of a New Elite, and also to chat a little bit about his approach to public sociology. So without further ado, Musa, welcome to the blog.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's jump right in. To start, why don't you just give us an introduction to the book? Tell us what's your central argument and what are the key insights that you hope readers will take away?
Yeah. So the kind of puzzle the book is trying to figure out is that starting in the period between the world wars and then accelerating after the 1970s, there was these shifts in the global economic order that favored people who work in the symbolic profession. So people like academics and journalists and consultants and finance people and so on and so forth. People who manipulate symbols and data and ideas and stuff instead of providing physical goods and services to people. One thing that's interesting about people like us is that from the outset, a lot of our professions have been oriented around altruism and the common good. So academics are supposed to just follow the truth wherever it leads without worrying about if we're serving anyone's political interests or economic interests. And journalists are supposed to speak truth to power and be a voice for the voiceless and so on and so forth. And if you look at contemporary America, like who are the Americans who are most likely to self-identify as anti-racist or feminists or environmentalists and allies to LGBTQ people and so on? It's people like us. And so what you might expect is that as people like ourselves have increased in power, as we have more power over institutions, over the functioning of the government, over political parties, as we have more wealth being concentrated in our hands, what you might expect is that inequalities would be shrinking. A lot of long-standing social problems would be getting resolved. We would be seeing a period of unprecedented growth and innovation. People would be having increased trust in institutions because of all the great work that we're doing, and so on. This is what we said would happen. We said, if you give us more power and more wealth and more influence, this is what you'll get. But what if you look at what has actually happened over this period as we've increased in power and influence, we've seen growing inequalities, economic stagnation, stagnation in terms of innovation, growing polarization, declining trust in institutions, increasing institutional dysfunction. And so the question that the book is trying to wrestle with basically is like, what's going on here? Why do we see what we actually see instead of what we said we would see and hope that we would see? Why do things seem to be going so far off the rails? And the tweet-length answer to that question is that while it's absolutely true that symbolic capitalists, which is the name that I give to these knowledge economy professionals and so on, that symbolic capitalists are deeply committed to social justice, we also very much want to be elites. Like we think it's appropriate and normal, and we aggressively try to make it the case that people take our opinions and preferences more seriously than those of a clerk at Stop and Shop or a mechanic or whatever. We think it's right and appropriate that our words carry more weight, that our preferences carry more weight. We think we deserve and should have a higher standard of living than most other people. We want our own children to have the same standard of living or even better. And these two drives are in tension, right? The desire to be an elite and the desire to help the poor and the disadvantaged in all of this are in fundamental tension. You can't really be an egalitarian social climber, right? It's a contradiction in terms. And this tension has basically defined the symbolic professions from the beginning, including all the way through the present. And so that's the short answer.
That was the short one.
Yeah.
Well, people can find the longer answer in the book. And in fact, I wanted to ask you, so you were shifting through massive amounts of data, both historical and then in the present, in public opinion, in wealth inequality. And I'm curious if anything surprised you along the way as you were looking at these changes, or more broadly in writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things surprised me over the course of doing the research. One was realizing the extent to which a lot of what we've seen after 2010 is really not new. It's actually a case of something. As I argue in the book, this period of awakening, of rapid change in how symbolic capitalists talk and think about social justice and engage in politics. There were 3 previous ones over the course of the 20th century, in addition to the one that's winding down now. And comparing and contrasting these cases, it's actually kind of mind-blowing how much, like truly disturbing, how much some of these scripts seem to repeat almost verbatim sometimes, and how some of these same dynamics seem to lay hold time and again, how little seems to be learned in the aftermath of some of the. So that was disturbing. On a more cheeky note, one of the things that was really disturbing to learn in a section of chapter 4, there's a section called Tempest in a Teapot. And one of the things I explore in that section is just how small of an audience we tend to have as academics, as journalists, how we tend to be speaking to this very narrow, idiosyncratic slice of society, which is the same slice of society we belong to. We're just talking to ourselves, basically. But as I was looking at the research of, for instance, like what a good selling book looks like, I felt some small amount of despair for my own book. And yeah, but so there, so there are a few things like that. But yeah, but just contextualizing this current moment was one of the things that was, to me, shocking, seeing how just how close. There are non-trivial differences, from cycle to cycle, but the level of similarity, I think, will shock a lot of readers who read the book.
For sure. I'll say some of those quotes were really striking, and even could be part of a kind of quiz game saying, like, which awakening was this? Definitely.
Absolutely.
Next, a more personal question for you. So you open the book with this discussion of how you entered academia and your kind of dual perspectives as both an outsider and an insider. And I would love to hear more about how you see both of these identities, often contrasting, it seems, shaped your approach to this work.
Yeah, I mean, so when I talk about my kind of unusual path to Columbia, which included community college, getting canceled by Fox News, it was a whole thing. But the reason I talk about that journey is just to help explain to readers, to my mind, to help explain to readers the motive for this book. There is this tradition in sociology, this kind of trope that you see repeated again and again, where a lot of analysts kind of tell a story about how a certain slice of people, as a result of their unique background or social experience, might have a unique view on society and see things that most other social theorists can't see. And then when you pay attention, it turns out that, lo and behold, the slice of society that the authors think have this unique insight also is 100% of the time the groups that they themselves belong to just so happen to be the slice of society. Okay, so I'm in my quiet, vain moments, I have feelings that maybe I have some kind of unusual insight as a result of, but I also really try to tamp down any temptations I have in that regard, precisely because I'm aware there's a whole literature of sociologists doing this all the time. And so for my purposes in the book, when I describe that, it's not to tell readers that I have some kind of unique insight or whatever. If I do or I don't, that'll be for the readers to decide. But it's mostly just to try to explain, like, why did I write this book? Of all the things that I could be researching or talking about, why this?
Absolutely. All right, lastly, since we've got you here on the blog, which aims to communicate sociology to a somewhat broader audience than you might be able to with, say, an academic journal article, I want to ask you more about your approach to public engagement and also to engaging readers with a wide variety of viewpoints. So tell us more, when you're writing for audiences, maybe within sociology too, but also beyond, what's your approach to speaking in a way that people are able to hear you and are receptive to what you have to say?
Yeah, I think, so I should say, like, it was the case when I first started writing for the public. I pretty much only wrote for left-leaning outlets. I didn't even try to write for other outlets. I assumed that no one would even want to, like when I guessed in my mind, who would want to hear what I have to say as a Black Muslim intellectual? Oh, almost certainly only other people on the left. But then I had this realization at some point. This realization was motivated by being canceled by Fox News. but I had this motivation at some point, this discovery, that, for instance, if I want to convince people not to bomb Syria, it doesn't do a lot if I'm writing in Al Jazeera to people who already think that bombing Syria is a bad idea, and I go preach to the choir, and we all go, yeah, yeah, we're smart, we're right. Like that doesn't do much. Like if you want to actually, if you have any hope that your writing might in some way contribute to people not bombing Syria, you have to go to the people who want to bomb Syria and explain to those people in a way that they'll find persuasive why bombing Syria is a bad idea. In order to do that well, you have to speak to people in terms of their own values and their own narratives and their own frames of reference. So you can't go in a conservative space and just talk to them in the, running from a bunch of assumptions that progressives like to adopt, especially as it relates to what their motives are, right? So if a lot of us in progressive spaces assume that the only reason someone is aligned with the right is because they're racist, sexist, authoritarian, they have bad faith, something like, they've been kind of false consciousness as a result of the Koch brothers and Trump cooking their brains or whatever. If that's our assumptions, and we try to go talk to those people and we're like, yeah, you should support this law that redistributes whatever, even though, you hate blacks. Like, and they're like, what are you talking about? I don't hate blacks, So you can't go into those spaces and reach those people having a bunch of prejudicial and often false understandings about what other people are motivated for. You have to kind of extend moral and intellectual charity towards other people so that you can produce a vision of other people and their motives and drives. You can actually speak to what they actually care about, what they're actually driven by, produce a picture of the world that they can recognize, even if they don't fully agree with it. And I think that doing that takes some work, and it's often, and it's not as satisfying as doing the kind of cheerleady, kind of rah, my own team is so great, those people, meh, kind of thing. And so I think this is part of the reason why a lot of sociologists don't do that, even though it's kind of obvious on one level. If we want to stop people from bombing Syria, we need to go to the people who want to bomb. So that's obvious, but almost no one does it. And part of the reason why we don't do that is this is because it's just not satisfying in the same way. Although there are other satisfactions. You can see sometimes people changing their minds. How often do you get to see that when you're preaching to the choir? Never. And then I think the other thing that really inhibits a lot of sociologists doing this, kind of reaching across different lines to reach people who don't already agree, is that is precisely the fact that you have to go where the fish are. So if I want to convince conservatives of something, I have to go to conservative outlets, conservative spaces, and talk to them. And so you can see this when you look at my own publication record. I have bylines in The Guardian and The Nation and The New York Times and The Atlantic, but I also have bylines in The National Review and The American Conservative. And I think a lot of sociologists would rather their work be completely sterile than have bylines with their name on it in The American Conservative. Like they would rather not have an impact than, God forbid, have any of their colleagues even possibly perceive that they might be a right-winger. And so I think this kind of concern with purity, with other people perceiving you as kind of having the right alignments or whatever, these social concerns that we have about how our colleagues and peers will perceive, often lead us to not doing the kinds of things we could to actually move the meter on issues we care about. If we actually want our work to help lift people out, if we think the work we do matters to solving social problems, if we want to lift people out of poverty, get people out of prison, and so on and so forth, we have to go try our best to reach the people who disagree with us and to convince policymakers and other stakeholders. But I think, there are social dynamics within our profession that often discourage people from doing that when they otherwise could.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and congratulations again on the book.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Take care.